This video was sponsored by Squarespace. Long before working together, I actually made my own website using Squarespace. I found it incredibly intuitive and user-friendly through every step of creation. They have 24/7, 365-day customer support that I've honestly never even had to use in the almost year I've been using the site. Everything is really straightforward, and being an all-in-one platform that never requires you to download patches or upgrades makes everything even easier. If you head over to www.squarespace.com/filmradar, you can get a free trial as well as 10% off of your first purchase. They have tons of great starting points, but you can feel free to customize as much or as little as you want to make your page feel like your own. And it's great for musicians, photographers, anybody with something to share. I've been using mine to showcase still images from my videos, as well as providing a contact sheet for anyone interested in hiring me for freelance work. I've used other sites like Squarespace before, but none that have quite fit my needs as Squarespace has. So if you'd like to try it out for yourself, again, the link is squarespace.com/filmradar to get your free trial and 10% off of your first purchase. I've always been fascinated with special effects in film. It, to me, more than any other department involved in the movie-making process, captures the essence of movie magic. Special effects can make us believe that Neo can dodge bullets, or that Yoda can lift an X-Wing with his mind, or that hobbits are real and in fact much shorter in stature than humans. But all it takes is watching some behind-the-scenes footage to discover that this effect is a clever use of green screen and still image cameras set to fire in rapid, perfectly timed succession, then stitched together seamlessly with the CG composite of the rooftop to complete the effect. This is just a large-scale prop being lifted up by a crane, later composited with blue screen footage of a miniature and some excellent puppeteering from Frank Oz to sell the scene. But how did the special effects team behind The Lord of the Rings create the size difference of the hobbits? How did they bring these fantastic locations and creatures to life? The challenge for the hobbits and for Gimli was that they have to appear smaller in every shot, and if even just one frame stood out of place, the effect would fall to pieces, and the films right along with it. So to combat this problem, the team employed many different techniques, like forced perspective, whereby placing one actor closer to the camera and one further away tricks our eye into thinking one is larger than the other. Specially designed props like Gandalf's cart allowed Elijah Wood to sit further back in the frame, but by keeping the camera locked in place and giving the actors the right eyeline, you would never be able to tell. This same technique was even used with a moving camera, by having motion-controlled rigs moving the actor and props at the same speed as the camera but in the opposite direction. Many scenes were accomplished through the use of different scaled props and sets, and if the characters were to occupy the frame at the same time, blue screen compositing could be utilized by filming one actor on set, one on a blue screen, with someone to later be digitally removed handling the props so that the characters can even interact with each other. Another technique used were big rigs, stilts-like suits that were given oversized costumes and big rubber animatronic hands that then could move throughout a scene when the camera was focused on the hobbits, and with only fleeting shots of the big rigs, you would never know it wasn't a real person. And when all else failed, there were always scale doubles, actors cast for being either very small or very large, who had their own respective props, costumes, and wigs made to act as scale stand-ins for the other actors, even using blue screen compositing to swap faces of the actors for some scenes. And with all of these different techniques working harmoniously, the effect stands up even 15 years later. One might even say that they haven't aged. So that solves the problem of scale for the characters, but what about the locations? Many larger-than-life fantastical locations are present throughout the trilogy with no appropriate real-world architecture to stand in for filming. So in some instances, like the Shire or Edoras, large-scale sets were built on location in New Zealand. But whenever the size was just too daunting to recreate at proper scale, miniature sets were built with incredible attention to detail so they would look as realistic as possible when on the big screen. Many other smaller sections of sets were built at their proper scale, which acted as the foreground plate for more complex shots with miniature footage and matte paintings in the background. These bigatures, as the team dubbed them, were so large and so detailed that you could basically have free roam of camera movement or framing, and then with blue screen compositing or use of digital doubles, you could place characters anywhere in the scene to create the illusion of a living, breathing world. Of course, places like Rivendell or Lothlorien had to be accomplished this way, but you may be surprised to learn that even places like the Dead Marshes or Fangorn Forest were brought to life almost entirely with special effects. I think by and large, if it can be done through practical effects, it should be done with practical effects. Effects like forced perspective or miniatures are more optical illusion than anything else. You're still using real people or real objects under real lights photographed with real cameras, and that will almost always look better than anything even the most talented digital artist can create artificially. But sometimes there just isn't a feasible way of pulling something off without the use of CGI. Take the major battle sequences, for instance. The amount of money it would take to hire tens of thousands of people, train them in stunt combat, choreograph their fight sequences, and get them all costumes and props and squeeze them onto one location, it just wouldn't be possible. So for sequences like the Battle of Helm's Deep or the Battle of Pelennor Fields, the only way for these scenes to be done any justice was through the implementation of CGI. Practical effects were used whenever they could be, like a lot of the close-up shots of the troops in combat or shots of miniatures for Helm's Deep and Minas Tirith. Outside of what was accomplished with miniatures and location shoots, the large battlefield of Pelennor Fields was entirely constructed through CGI, with a technique similar to a panoramic effect used in photography. The crew gathered shots of mountains and rivers and fields and sky and stitched it all together into a 3D digital space where they could move the camera however and wherever they needed, so that no matter where they placed the camera they would have a geographically accurate background. And as for the battles themselves, they employed the use of a software program called Massive. It's essentially an AI simulation where you can randomize different variables of each individual agent to create a group that doesn't just feel like clones of the same model. Each agent is textured with the appropriate armor and weaponry, taught how to move and to fight through motion capture data from the stunt team. They react to sight and sound to know where to move, when to attack or to block, and then the program just runs its course. You can take more manual control if the shot demands something specific, but a lot of the large skirmishes depicted in wide shots are just the program working effectively. Then with the AI software running, combined with these digital 3D spaces, elaborate miniatures, and on-set action with all of the actors and stunt people, you end up with some of the most epic battle sequences ever filmed. The battle sequences aren't the only thing that benefited from the use of CGI. It was also heavily used in the creation of some of the various creatures seen in the films. They all start with a 3D maquette, a scaled-down sculpture that is built just as they would build any of the miniatures, fully detailed and painted to then be laser scanned so every bit of that detail can be brought into a digital workstation. They then begin the skeletal rigging and layering in the muscles so that the creature moves realistically. And finally, they add in the scanned texture on top, and through the help of motion capture and keyframe animation, they're brought to life. Without question, the most impressive of these creations has to be Gollum, a landmark achievement in the visual effects world at that time. Originally intended to be purely a voiceover performance, after seeing Andy Serkis's audition tape and seeing how committed he was to the performance, they decided to use the actor as much as possible to dictate the animation. So for every scene featuring the character, they would film one scene on set or location with the other actors, and then film another version of the scene on a motion capture stage to give the animators something to work off of. But they ran into a problem. The original design of Gollum had different enough facial features that when trying to animate him to match Andy's performance, it just didn't look right. So even though most of the visual effects work involving Gollum in the Two Towers had already been completed, they went back to redesign Gollum to look more like Andy. This is why the brief glimpse of Gollum that we see in Fellowship looks different than what we see in the other two films, because that was the original design intended for use that was finished long before Andy was ever hired. But eventually it all began to fall into place. Using Andy's performance for reference whenever possible, the animators transformed him into his digital counterpart, taking certain liberties to make the character more agile or limber for certain scenes. One of the most notable touches that made Gollum such a believable character was his skin, which was helped along by the film's lead makeup designer. One of the VFX artists noticed his ability to paint veins or other subdermal details on top of the skin, and combining their areas of expertise, they managed to create a skin texture that looked much closer to the real thing than had ever been achieved before. And so, through a brilliant performance from Andy Serkis and a team of skilled animators, they created what to this day may well be the most compelling CG character ever created for a live-action film. All of this barely scratches the surface of the tremendous work that went into creating these films, but for such a massive fantasy story to be brought to the screen faithfully, special effects were paramount to the trilogy's success, and considering the incredible strides the team made in revolutionizing technology, new and old, to bring a story that was previously thought to be unfilmable to the big screen, and more impressively, to actually pull it off puts it at or very near the top of special effects achievements in film. It's no wonder then that all three took home the Oscar for Best Achievement in Visual Effects, the only Oscar that all three films share. But ultimately, special effects are just tools in service of something greater. In the wise words of Luke Skywalker himself, well, Mark Hamill that is,
special effects are the purest form of movie making. With them, we can create visions that owe nothing to any other form of artistic expression, and which no other art can possibly duplicate. We now possess a technology that places anything man can imagine within reach of the camera. There's no place, past, present, or future, it cannot go. But if we possess this new technology, we mustn't allow it to possess us, as so many of the century's great inventions have come to do. For in the end, special effect is just a special effect. If it isn't surrounded by people we care about, if it doesn't serve a story that moves and involves us, and if, above all, it doesn't help us to grasp some larger imaginative vision, then it's just a trick, a gimmick.
While special effects were crucial to the film's success, they're not the reason that these films stay with us. If it weren't for the incredible story of courage and sacrifice, or the characters that come to mean so much to us, these films would never be able to stand the test of time, no matter how good the special effects are. But instead, they're used to elevate everything else, to turn these films into something more than just spectacle. Thank you for watching. In case you were wondering, all the different behind the scenes footage that I used in this video comes directly from the extended trilogy. So if you're looking to learn more about, costume design or the prop department or that sort of stuff, it's really interesting to watch all the way through. And also, I would just really recommend checking out the extended trilogy for the films. If you've only ever seen the theatrical versions, they're great. Don't get me wrong, that's the way I watched them for years, but if you're a fan of Lord of the Rings, I don't think more is a bad thing. And of course, I want to say a huge thank you to my patrons for helping to support this channel and for helping to support me. I'm actually getting ready to move pretty soon, and so any financial support is really greatly appreciated, and I thank you for it. There will be a new Film Radar video within the next couple of weeks, so stay tuned for that, and thank you guys for watching. I'll see you next time.